The snow fell on the 23rd day of silence, and Elena knew with absolute certainty that the war was finally over. Before we continue, if you'd like to join me for more stories like this, feel free to subscribe. I share a new one every day. And if you don't mind, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel. She stood at the window of her small apartment watching the flakes drift past the streetlight that had miraculously survived when so many others hadn't. The snow was clean and white and utterly indifferent to the scars it covered, the shattered pavement, the burned-out vehicles pushed to the roadside, the gaps in the building facades where shells had punched through stone and wood and lives. It fell the way snow had always fallen, the way it would continue to fall long after all of them were gone, and there was something comforting in that continuity. 23 days since the last gunshot, 23 days since the last convoy rolled through with its cargo of young men whose eyes had seen too much. 23 days of waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the fragile ceasefire to shatter like everything else had shattered. But it hadn't. The silence had held, and now the snow was falling, as if nature itself was declaring the fighting finished, drawing a clean white curtain over the ugliness. Elena was 31, though she felt decades older. The mirror showed someone she barely recognized, thin to the point of gauntness, dark circles permanent beneath her eyes, hair that had started graying at the temples, even though she was far too young for that. Her hands, when she held them up to the light, showed the calluses of someone who'd learned to chop wood to carry water up 4 flights of stairs, when the pumps failed to make a single candle last an entire evening, by rationing light the way they rationed everything else. Behind her, in the small bedroom, her daughter Mila slept, 7 years old, though she'd spent nearly half her life in a world where the sound of distant artillery was as common as birdsong, where hunger was a constant companion, where the concept of normal had become something abstract and unreachable. Elena checked on her every few hours, unable to shake the habit of vigilance even now, even in silence. Mila was thin, too, her small body showing the deficit of years when food was scarce, and nutrition was whatever could be scrounged or bartered or grown in makeshift window boxes. The apartment was cold. It was always cold now. The building's central heating had failed in the second winter of the war and never been repaired. They heated with a small wood-burning stove that Elena had installed herself, following instructions from a neighbor who died 6 months ago in the shelling. The stove was inefficient and temperamental, but it kept them from freezing, which was all that mattered. Elena added another piece of wood to the fire, carefully because the supply was limited and winter had only just begun. She'd spent the autumn gathering what she could find, dragging branches from the park that had become a no-man's land, breaking apart abandoned furniture, even taking wood from damaged buildings where no one would object, because no one remained to object. The pile in the corner represented weeks of work, and she calculated constantly, trying to determine if it would be enough to last until spring. The snow continued to fall. Elena made tea from dried herbs she'd collected in summer, when the fighting had paused long enough for her to venture into the countryside. The cup warmed her hands, and she stood at the window drinking it slowly, making it last, watching the street below transform into something that almost looked peaceful. A figure appeared in the snow, moving slowly down the middle of the street. Elena tensed instinctively, then forced herself to relax. It was just old Mr. Kovac from the building across the way, walking his usual evening route. He'd continued his walks throughout the war, even during the worst of it, maintaining routine as if normalcy could be willed into existence through sheer stubbornness. He looked up at her window and waved. She waved back, and they shared a moment of silent acknowledgement. We're still here, still standing, still trying. The first winter of peace. The phrase kept running through Elena's mind. It should have felt like celebration, like relief, like the weight lifting. And perhaps it did in some way she hadn't yet learned to recognize. But mostly it felt like exhaustion. Like the moment after a long race, when your body finally understands it can stop running and threatens to simply collapse. She finished her tea and moved away from the window, beginning her evening routine. Check the door locks. a habit from when locks had meant the difference between safety and danger, though what she was locking against now she couldn't quite say. Check the stove, make sure it was burning cleanly, wouldn't fill the apartment with smoke or, worse, carbon monoxide. Check the water supply, they had running water again, intermittently, but she still kept emergency containers filled just in case. Check on Mila. Always check on Mila. Her daughter slept with a stillness that had worried Elena at first, until she understood it was the sleep of someone who'd learned not to draw attention even in unconsciousness. Mila's face in repose looked younger than 7, vulnerable in a way that made Elena's chest tighten with protective fury and helpless love. She adjusted the blankets, 3 of them, layered because warmth was precious, and allowed herself a moment of just watching. This child had known nothing but war for half her life. What would peace teach her? Would she remember how to play without flinching at sudden sounds? Would the nightmares fade? Would the careful, quiet way she moved through the world eventually give way to the exuberance that should be childhood's birthright? Elena didn't know, couldn't know, could only wait and hope and try to create conditions where healing might be possible. She returned to the main room and settled into the chair by the stove, picking up the knitting she'd been working on for weeks. A sweater for Mila, made from unraveled yarn from an old blanket, the stitches uneven because Elena had taught herself from a book and had no one to correct her mistakes. But it would be warm, which was the point. Beauty was a luxury. Function was survival. The needles clicked softly, rhythmically. Outside, the snow fell. The silence held. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, Elena felt something in her chest begin to unknot. The war had come gradually, then suddenly. There had been warnings, tensions, the kind of political maneuvering that seemed important to people who followed such things, but felt distant and abstract to Elena, who'd been focused on her teaching job and raising Mila alone after her husband had left, when Mila was just a baby. The divorce had been bitter, but it had also been clean. He'd moved to another country, sent money occasionally, and otherwise disappeared from their lives. When the first shells fell, Elena had thought it was a mistake, an accident, something that would be quickly resolved. She'd grabbed Mila and run to the basement along with the other residents of their building, and they'd waited for the all clear that they assumed would come within hours. It didn't come for 4 years. 4 years of learning to survive, of basements and bunkers, of running between safe zones, of ration cards and black markets and the constant calculation of risk versus necessity. 4 years of watching the city transform from a place of order and beauty into something scarred and broken and barely recognizable. 4 years of loss, friends, neighbors, the structure of normal life, the assumption of safety that she'd never even realized she'd held until it was gone, but they'd survived. She and Mila had survived. And now the war was over and they were facing a different kind of challenge. How to live when survival was no longer the only goal. The knitting grew slowly. Elena's eyes were tired and the candlelight was dim, but she continued because the work was soothing, because it gave her hands something to do, because creating something useful from scraps felt like a small victory against chaos. A knock at the door made her jump, her heart racing before her mind could catch up, and remind her that knocks were probably safe now, were probably just neighbors or someone needing help. She set aside the knitting and approached cautiously, old habits dying hard. "Who is it?" "It's Anna from downstairs. I wanted to check on you." Elena opened the door to find Anna holding a covered pot that steamed in the cold air. Anna was perhaps 50, sturdy and practical, the kind of woman who'd taken charge during the worst times, organizing the building's residents into a mutual aid network that had probably saved several lives. "I made soup," Anna said without preamble. "Too much for just me. Thought you and Mila might want some." The smell that rose from the pot was heavenly. Real vegetables, maybe even some meat. Elena's mouth watered immediately. "Anna, I can't take your food." "You can and you will. I'm not asking." Anna pushed past her into the apartment, heading straight for the small kitchen. "Besides, I need the pot back, so you'll have to eat it. Where are your bowls?" Elena found herself smiling, the expression feeling strange on her face. as if the muscles had forgotten how. "You're very bossy." "Someone has to be. If we all just sat in our apartments being polite and starving, where would we be?" Anna ladled soup into 2 bowls with the confidence of someone who'd made an executive decision and wouldn't be argued out of it. "Mila asleep?" "Yes." "Good. Let her sleep. You can save some for her breakfast." Anna handed Elena a bowl. "Eat. You're too thin. Everyone's too thin, but you especially." They sat together at the small table, eating in companionable silence. The soup was simple but delicious. Potatoes, cabbage, onions, and yes, small pieces of what might have been chicken. Elena ate slowly, making it last, savoring each spoonful. "The Petrovics are coming back," Anna said eventually, "from the countryside where they evacuated. They sent word through someone. Should be here next week." "That's good. The building feels empty with so many gone." "Some won't come back," Anna said quietly. "Some can't. Some won't want to. Can't say I blame them. Starting over somewhere else, somewhere without memories." She shrugged. "Maybe that's easier. Or maybe it's just different hard. Maybe." They finished their soup. Anna collected her pot and prepared to leave, then paused at the door. "There's a community meeting tomorrow. At the old school building. What's left of it. People are organizing, talking about repairs, about getting systems running again, about what we need to do to make it through winter. You should come." "I don't know if I—" "You should come," Anna repeated firmly. "We need everyone. And you need to be part of things, not just hiding up here alone." After Anna left, Elena washed the bowls carefully, conserving water, then returned to her knitting. But her mind was elsewhere, thinking about the meeting, about community, about the strange and difficult work of transitioning from survival mode to whatever came next. The snow had stopped by morning. Elena woke to pale sunlight filtering through the window and the sound of Mila moving quietly in the bedroom. She got up stiffly. The chair wasn't comfortable for sleeping, but she dozed off with her knitting still in her lap and found her daughter standing at the window, looking out at the transformed street. "It snowed," Mila said, her voice carrying a wonder that made Elena's heart ache. "Everything is white." "Yes, love. First snow of winter. Can we go out? Can we play in it?" The question was so normal, so childlike that Elena felt tears threaten. When had Mila last asked to play? When had the concept of playing for its own sake last been possible? "Yes," Elena said. "We can go out after breakfast." Breakfast was the soup Anna had left, reheated and shared between them. Mila ate hungrily, and Elena felt grateful for neighbors who showed kindness in practical ways. They dressed in layers, everything they owned basically, because staying warm was essential, and ventured out into the snow. The street was already showing signs of activity. Mr. Kovac was shoveling the sidewalk in front of his building, his breath puffing white in the cold air. 2 children Elena didn't recognize were building a snowman in front of what had been the corner store. The normalcy of it was surreal and beautiful. Mila hesitated at first, as if she'd forgotten how to simply play, but then she bent down, scooped up snow, and threw it experimentally. It scattered in the air, and she laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was so pure and unexpected that Elena felt something break open inside her chest. They played for perhaps 20 minutes, building a small snowman, making snow angels, just being present in the cold brightness. Mila's cheeks turned pink with cold and exertion, and when she smiled, Elena saw glimpses of the child she might have been in a world without war. Other children emerged from buildings, tentatively at first. Then, with increasing confidence, they joined in the snow play. Parents watched from windows or doorways, keeping the vigilance that none of them could quite abandon. But the children were laughing, running, throwing snow, rediscovering the simple joy of being young in winter. Elena stood watching Mila play with a little boy about her age. Both of them focused on making the biggest snowball possible. The boy's mother stood nearby, and they exchanged the cautious smiles of parents who've survived something terrible and are trying to figure out what comes next. "I'm Sonia," the woman said. "We live in the yellow building." "Elena, 4th floor, brick building." The identifications were still location-based, landmarks in a city that had lost so many. Your son, Victor, he's 8. Yours? Mila, 7. They watched the children work together, the silence between the women comfortable rather than awkward. Both understanding what didn't need to be said, the relief of seeing their children play, the fear that it could all be taken away again, the exhaustion of maintaining hope. There's a meeting today, Sonia said eventually. At the school. Are you going? I'm thinking about it. We should go, both of us. Show up, participate. That's how we make this real, right? By acting like it's permanent until it actually becomes permanent. Elena considered this. The logic was sound, even if the emotional weight felt overwhelming. All right, I'll go. They collected their children eventually. When fingers were too cold and noses were running, Mila's face was flushed with exertion and happiness, and she chattered all the way up the stairs about the snowman, about Victor, about how deep the snow was. Elena listened and responded, and felt grateful for this moment of lightness. The community meeting was held in what had been the school's gymnasium. The roof had been partially destroyed by shelling, but someone had rigged a tarp to keep out the weather, and people had brought chairs and blankets to make the space functional. Perhaps 40 people gathered, a mix of ages, familiar faces, and strangers who must have returned recently or emerged from hiding. A man Elena vaguely recognized. He'd been an engineer before the war, stood at the front and called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming. I'm Peter Markovich, and I've been asked to help coordinate reconstruction efforts. But this isn't about one person leading. This is about all of us figuring out together what we need and how to get it. He outlined the situation with brutal honesty. The city's infrastructure was devastated. Power was intermittent at best. Water systems were damaged. Most businesses were closed, their buildings destroyed or owners fled or dead. The government, what remained of it, was overwhelmed and couldn't be relied on for immediate help. International aid might come eventually, but for now they were essentially on their own. So the question, Peter said, is what do we prioritize? What do we need most urgently to survive winter and begin rebuilding? The discussion that followed was chaotic but earnest. People called out needs: medical supplies, food distribution systems, heating fuel, building repairs. Each suggestion revealed the depth of the crisis, the 1,000 ways the war had broken basic systems of survival. Anna stood up, her voice cutting through the crosstalk. We need to organize ourselves, create committees or working groups, one for food and supplies, one for building repairs, one for medical care, one for children and education. We can't solve everything at once, but we can start making progress on multiple fronts. People nodded and Peter seized on the structure. All right, everyone who's willing to work on a particular area, gather together. We'll spend the next hour identifying specific needs and first steps. Elena found herself gravitating toward the education group, mostly because that's what she'd done before and it felt like familiar ground. About 10 people clustered together, including Sonia and a handful of others she recognized as former teachers or parents. School hasn't functioned in 2 years, someone said. Most of the buildings are damaged. We don't have books, supplies, anything. But we have children, Elena said quietly. Children who've missed years of education. We can't give them back that time, but we can start from where we are. Where's that? Wherever they are. If we don't have school buildings, we use homes. Rotate through different apartments, small groups. Focus on basics, reading, math, enough to build on. Start simple, build as we can. Build as we... The idea took hold. They sketched out a plan. Identify which children needed schooling, assess their levels, recruit volunteer teachers, create a rotating schedule using whatever spaces were available. It wouldn't be formal education, wouldn't replace what had been lost, but it would be something, a structure, a routine, a signal that life was returning to normal. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, groups had formed around different priorities, plans were sketched out, and there was a collective sense that action was possible, that they weren't just passive victims waiting for rescue, but active agents in their own recovery. Walking home, Elena felt cautiously energized. The work would be hard, maybe impossible, but it was direction, purpose, something beyond just surviving day to day. Mila was waiting at the apartment, having been watched by an elderly neighbor. She was drawing at the table using precious paper and a stubby pencil to create elaborate scenes of snow and trees and small figures playing. "What did you do at the meeting?" she asked. "We made plans for school." Mila's eyes widened. "Real school? Not like before, not yet, but something. Learning with other children, with teachers. Would you like that?" "Will Victor be there?" Elena smiled. "Probably, if his mother agrees." "Then yes, I'd like that." That night, as Elena prepared their small dinner, bread and preserved vegetables from their dwindling supplies, she thought about education as continuation, as an investment in future that declared the present was worth building from. Teaching children meant believing they'd have a future worth preparing for. It was an act of faith she hadn't realized she was ready to make. The days developed rhythm. Each morning, Elena checked on their supplies, calculated how much fuel they could burn that day, how much food they could eat. Mila had small tasks, helping with dishes, tidying their space, practicing reading with salvaged books. They were establishing routine, and routine was its own form of healing. The informal school started 2 weeks later. 5 children initially, meeting in Anna's larger apartment because she had space and a functioning stove. Elena taught with Sonia and another woman, Petra, who'd been a math teacher. They had no curriculum, no formal materials. They worked with whatever they could find. Old newspapers for reading practice, handwritten math problems, history lessons drawn from memory and oral storytelling. The children were eager but damaged. Some had gaps in their learning that spoke to years of interrupted education. Others carried trauma that manifested in difficulty concentrating, in startled responses to sudden sounds, in the careful way they monitored adults for signs of danger. Elena and the other teachers adapted, learning to provide structure while remaining gentle, to push for progress while accepting limitations. Mila thrived, having other children around, having a routine, having purpose. It brought her alive in ways Elena hadn't seen since before the war. She made friends, particularly Victor, but also 2 girls near her age. They studied together, played together during breaks, began creating the bonds that might eventually become genuine childhood friendship. One afternoon, while the children worked on writing assignments, Elena stepped outside for air. The cold was sharp, but the sky was clear, brilliant blue against white snow. Sonia joined her, and they stood together in companionable silence. "They're doing well," Sonia said. "The children. Better than I expected. Children are resilient, more than adults sometimes. Or maybe they just hide it better. Victor has nightmares, wakes up screaming about things he saw." Sonia's voice was carefully neutral, but Elena heard the pain beneath. "I don't know how to help him." "You're doing it. You're here. You're stable. You're creating safe routine. That's what he needs. Consistency, safety, proof that the world can be trustworthy again." "Do you believe that? That the world can be trustworthy?" Elena considered carefully. "I believe we can create small pockets of trust. Here, in this apartment, in this makeshift school, among ourselves. That might be enough." Winter deepened. The snow kept coming, burying the city's scars under white. Elena and Mila settled into routine. Morning lessons at Anna's apartment 3 days a week. Afternoons spent gathering fuel or doing whatever work needed doing. Evenings by the stove knitting or reading or simply being together. The supply situation improved slightly. International aid organizations finally reached the city, bringing food parcels and medical supplies and, most precious of all, fuel. The distribution was organized through community groups, preventing the chaos of everyone grabbing what they could. Elena volunteered to help, spending several afternoons at a distribution center sorting packages and checking names against lists. The work was exhausting but satisfying. She met people from across the city, heard stories of survival and loss, began to understand the full scope of what they'd endured collectively. Everyone had lost something: homes, family members, health, years of life. But everyone who was there had also survived, and there was power in that shared resilience. She met a doctor working at a makeshift clinic, a man in his 50s named Dr. Kovacevic, who'd stayed throughout the war, treating whoever came to him with whatever supplies he could scrounge. He was gaunt and exhausted, but utterly committed to continuing. "We need more medical personnel," he told Elena when he learned she'd been helping organize the school. "People with any training at all, even basic first aid, would be useful. I don't have medical training." "Could you learn? I can teach basics, wound care, recognizing serious illness, when to bring someone to the clinic versus when to manage at home. It would help enormously to have people distributed through neighborhoods who could provide initial assessment." Elena hesitated. She was already stretched thin, already juggling teaching and caring for Mila and basic survival. But the need was real, and Dr. Kovačević's exhaustion suggested he couldn't continue alone much longer. "I'll try," she said. "Teach me what you can, and I'll do my best." She started spending 2 mornings a week at the clinic, learning from Dr. Kovačević and a nurse named Ivana, who'd also stayed throughout the war. But it was also purposeful. Elena had spent 4 years focused entirely on keeping herself and Mila alive. One evening, returning home from the clinic, she found Mila waiting with unusual excitement. "Mama, look what Victor's mother gave us." Oranges. Elena could barely believe it. Fresh fruit had been impossible to find for years. They came in an aid package. She said to share, because Victor doesn't like them much. "Can we eat them now? Please?" They peeled the oranges together. The scent so bright and alive it almost hurt. "It tastes like before," Mila said quietly. "Like I remember." "What do you remember?" "You taking me to the market. There were colors everywhere and smells. And you bought me an orange. I dropped it and it rolled away, and you chased it and we were both laughing." She opened her eyes, looking at Elena. "I didn't know if that was real or if I made it up." "It was real. You were 4, maybe. We went to the big market near the river. Can we go there again, when spring comes?" Elena didn't know if the market still existed, if the building had survived, if vendors would return. But she said, "Yes, when spring comes we'll go see what's there." The winter solstice passed quietly. Some neighbors marked it with a small gathering, sharing what food they could spare, lighting candles against the longest night. It wasn't celebration exactly. No one had the energy or resources for that. But it was acknowledgement, a collective pause to recognize that they'd reached the midpoint of winter, that the days would start growing longer again, that spring would eventually come. Elena and Mila attended, bringing bread that Elena had managed to bake in their small oven. The gathering was in the building's lobby, people sitting on stairs and brought chairs, bundled against the cold, because there was no way to heat the large space. Someone had brought an old guitar, and after some hesitation they began singing. Old songs, familiar melodies from before the war. Voices were tentative at first, as if they'd forgotten how to sing together. But gradually they grew stronger, filling the space with something besides silence and loss. Mila sat curled against Elena's side, listening intently. When they sang a children's song, she recognized her small voice joined in, pure and clear. Others heard and smiled, and for a moment the gathering felt almost joyful, almost like people celebrating rather than just enduring. After the singing, people shared stories. Anna talked about her childhood winters, sledding on hills that no longer existed because the buildings had been destroyed. Mr. Kovač described elaborate holiday meals from his youth, foods that seemed impossibly abundant now. Sonia spoke about teaching Victor to build a snowman before the war, how he'd insisted on giving it a carrot nose even though they needed the carrot for soup. The stories were bittersweet, celebrating a past that felt impossibly distant. But they were also connection, the sharing of memory that made them more than just isolated individuals trying to survive. They were a community with shared history, shared loss, and maybe shared future. When it was Elena's turn, she spoke about teaching, about the classroom she'd had before the war with its bright posters and rows of small desks, about a particular student who'd struggled with reading until suddenly something clicked, and the whole world of books opened for her, about the satisfaction of watching understanding dawn on a child's face. "I want that again," Elena said. "Not exactly as it was, we can't go back, but some version of it. Children learning, growing, becoming whoever they're meant to be, that's worth working for." People nodded. The makeshift school had become known in the building, and others had started asking if they could join, if their children could participate. The need was obvious and enormous. Education as normalcy, as structure, as hope. The new year came. People marked it quietly, midnight passing with a few cold greetings between apartments, some neighbors stepping outside to watch the night sky as if looking for portents. Elena stayed by the window with Mila, and they watched together, not speaking, just present to the transition. "Is this year going to be better?" Mila asked. "I hope so, love. I think it will be. Because the war is over? Because we're learning how to live again. It takes time, learning that. We're still figuring it out. I'm glad we're here, together." Elena pulled her daughter close, feeling the fierce protective love that had kept her going through the darkest times. "Me too, Lyubavi. Me too." January brought bitter cold. The city struggled with fuel shortages and people huddled in whatever spaces they could heat. The informal school had to pause for a week when Anna's apartment became too cold to safely use. Elena kept Mila occupied at home, doing lessons by the stove, trying to maintain routine even when structure collapsed around them. The fuel situation was resolved eventually through a combination of aid deliveries and people sharing resources. Elena contributed what she could spare to a building-wide pool, and they rationed it collectively, ensuring everyone had enough to avoid freezing even if it meant everyone was perpetually cold. The clinic stayed busy. Dr. Kovacevic treated cases of frostbite and hypothermia alongside the ongoing needs of a population that had suffered years of deprivation. Elena helped where she could, learning more with each case, gradually becoming competent at basic care. She found satisfaction in the work, in using her hands to help rather than just scraping by. One afternoon, a woman came to the clinic carrying a toddler who was burning with fever. Dr. Kovacevic examined the child quickly, his face grave. "Pneumonia, probably. She needs antibiotics, but we're out." "Completely out? We're expecting a delivery next week, but..." He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew next week might be too late. Elena thought quickly. "There's a pharmacy across the river. I heard they got supplies recently, maybe too far, especially in this cold. And we don't know if they'd share. I could try." Dr. Kovacevic looked at her. "It's risky. The bridges are dangerous, damaged from shelling, and if they refuse to help, then I come back empty-handed and we wait for next week. But if they have something, if I can get it..." Elena looked at the toddler, her small face flushed with fever, her mother's desperate eyes. "I have to try." She bundled up in every layer she owned and set out. The walk to the river took 20 minutes through snow-packed streets. The bridge, when she reached it, looked precarious, sections of railing missing, the surface cracked and uneven, but people had been crossing it. She could see tracks in the snow. Elena tested each step, moving slowly, gripping what remained of the railing. The wind was fierce over the water, cutting through her layers. Halfway across, she stopped, looking down at the frozen river below, thinking about fear, necessity, and the calculations everyone was making constantly. She made it across. The pharmacy was in a building that had been partially destroyed, but someone had boarded up the damaged sections and hung a hand-painted sign, "Clinic knock for service." Elena knocked. After a moment, a young woman opened the door cautiously. "Yes? I'm looking for antibiotics. For a child with pneumonia. We have a clinic across the river, but we're out of supplies and we don't have much. Barely enough for our own patients. Please, I know you have your own needs. I'm not asking you to deplete your stores. Just enough for one child. I can pay or trade or..." "What would you trade?" Elena thought about what she had, not much. But then she remembered. "I can teach. I was a teacher before. I'm helping run a school now for children who lost years. If you have kids who need education, I could tutor them. Or I'm learning basic medical care. I could help here, take shifts, whatever you need." The woman studied her, then sighed. "Wait here." She returned with a small bottle of pills. "Enough for 5 days. Standard dose for a toddler. Make sure the mother understands the full course needs to be completed, even if the child seems better." "How much?" Nothing. This time. But if you're serious about tutoring, we have 3 children here who need schooling. Come back next week if you can manage the crossing. I will, thank you. The walk back was easier, knowing she'd succeeded. The medicine felt precious in her pocket. This small thing that might save a life. She delivered it to Dr. Kovacevic, who immediately prepared a dose for the toddler. You crossed the bridge in this cold, he said. It was necessary. Still, that took courage. Or desperation. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. The toddler's fever broke 2 days later. Elena saw the mother at a distribution center, and the woman hugged her wordlessly, tears streaming. She's better. She's going to be all right. I'm glad. Keep giving her the medicine, all of it. I will, thank you. I don't know how to thank you. Help someone else when you can. That's thanks enough. Elena started crossing the bridge weekly, true to her promise. The clinic across the river needed help, and in exchange for her time teaching 3 children, they shared medical supplies and knowledge. It was an informal arrangement, the kind of mutual aid network that was developing throughout the city as people figured out how to support each other. The children she taught were bright and eager, starved for education and normalcy. She met with them twice a week, working on reading and basic math, giving them structure and attention. Their parents were grateful, often insisting on sharing food or offering other help. The exchanges built trust, created connections across the divided city. February arrived with slightly less brutal cold. The days were lengthening noticeably, each sunset coming a few minutes later than the one before. Spring still felt distant, but it was no longer unimaginable. The makeshift school expanded again. More children joined, requiring more teachers. Elena recruited Petra to help, and they divided the students into smaller groups based on age and ability. They met in different apartments, on a rotating schedule, spreading the burden of hosting, sharing resources and responsibility. Mila flourished. She was reading well now, working on books that challenged her, demonstrating a hunger for stories and knowledge that delighted Elena. She'd made real friends among the other children, and they played together after lessons, creating elaborate games in the snow, building forts and having snowball battles and just being young. One afternoon, Elena overheard Mila and Victor playing. They'd built a snow fort and were defending it from imaginary invaders, but their play was informed by what they'd witnessed. Victor giving tactical advice about cover and angles, Mila organizing defenses with the seriousness of someone who knew what real danger meant. It was heartbreaking and normal both. Childhood reasserting itself, but shaped indelibly by experience. Elena mentioned it to Dr. Kovacevic during one of her clinic shifts. Should I be worried? That their play reflects the war. It's how they process. Through play, they work through trauma, try to make sense of what they experienced. It's actually healthy as long as it doesn't consume them. How do I know if it's consuming them? Watch for balance. If Mila can also play at other things, if she shows joy sometimes, if she's engaging with the present and not just reliving the past, then she's probably okay. The concern is when children get stuck, can't move past the trauma to engage with now. Elena thought about this, observing Mila more closely. And yes, there was balance. War-themed play, but also building snowmen and sledding and drawing pictures of flowers and butterflies. Engagement with past trauma and present possibility both. Maybe that was the best they could hope for. Not forgetting, but not being trapped either. The clinic continued to be busy. Winter illnesses, injuries from people working in dangerous conditions, chronic conditions flaring up from years of inadequate care and nutrition. Dr. Kovacevic worked himself to exhaustion, and Elena worried about him even as she tried to help ease the burden. One evening she found him sitting with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. She approached carefully. "Doctor, I'm sorry, He looked up and his face was wet with tears. "I couldn't save her. 8 years old, complications from malnutrition. Her body just gave up. I tried everything, but nothing worked." Elena sat beside him silently. What could be said? The losses were enormous, the capacity to prevent them limited. They could only do what they could do, and sometimes that wasn't enough. "You've saved so many," she said eventually. "That child with pneumonia I brought the medicine for, she's alive because of you. Dozens of others. Hundreds, probably. You can't save everyone, but the ones you do save, They matter. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But it's what we have. Our hands, our knowledge, our willingness to try. That's all any of us can offer. They sat together until his tears stopped, until he gathered himself enough to continue. Then they returned to work, because the needs didn't pause for grief, because the living required care, because stopping wasn't an option. March brought the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing the city beneath, damaged, scarred, but still standing. The river ice broke up, chunks floating downstream, the sound of moving water returning after months of winter silence. The mood shifted. People emerged more readily from their homes, began talking about what could be planted when the ground thawed, made plans for repairs that required warmer weather. Hope, tentative but real, began to circulate through conversations. The school continued. Elena was teaching 12 children now, a proper class even if they met in someone's living room instead of a building designated for education. They'd acquired more materials, donated books from aid organizations, paper and pencils, even a few basic textbooks. The curriculum was becoming more structured, more ambitious. She organized a small end-of-winter celebration for the students and their families. Nothing elaborate, just an afternoon of sharing food and showing off work the children had done. They hung drawings on the walls, and students read short pieces they'd written, and parents watched with expressions of wonder and gratitude. Sonia spoke for many when she said, "You've given them back something I thought was lost. Not just education, but normality, purpose. A reason to wake up each day beyond just surviving." "They gave it to themselves," Elena replied. "I just created space for it." After the celebration, Anna pulled Elena aside. "The Reconstruction Committee wants to talk to you about organizing formal education for the whole district, using you as a model. I don't know anything about organizing formally. This is just improvised. Improvisation that works. That's exactly what they need. Someone who understands what's actually possible versus what looks good on paper." Elena agreed to meet with the committee, feeling both honored and overwhelmed. The meeting was held in a partially restored government building, with representatives from various districts sharing information about education efforts. The situation was better than Elena had feared, but worse than she'd hoped. Scattered efforts like hers existed throughout the city, but there was no coordination, no sharing of resources, no overall structure. Some neighborhoods had schools of sorts, others had nothing. Children were falling through the cracks, missing yet more education. "What we need," Peter Markovich said, he was chairing this committee too, apparently the de facto coordinator for much of the rebuilding, "is a distributed system. Not trying to recreate the old centralized school system, which we don't have resources for, but recognizing and supporting the informal efforts that are working. Providing materials, training teachers, creating some basic standards while allowing local adaptation." It made sense, and over the next 2 hours, they sketched out a framework. Each neighborhood would maintain its own informal school, organized by whoever was willing to lead. The Central Committee would provide materials and support, connect educators so they could share methods, ensure minimum standards were met. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be something. Elena volunteered to help coordinate for her district. It meant more work, more responsibility, but it also felt important, like building foundation for actual recovery rather than just temporary survival measures. Walking home, she thought about structure and improvisation, about the tension between needing organization and needing flexibility. The rigid, centralized systems of before had collapsed. What they were building now was more organic, more adaptable. Whether that would make it stronger or weaker remained to be seen. April arrived with sudden warmth. The snow melted rapidly, leaving mud and the stark reality of damage everywhere. But green things began appearing. Grass pushing up through cracks in pavement, buds on the few trees that had survived, early flowers in window boxes that optimistic souls had planted. Elena and Mila planted seeds in containers on their windowsill. Herbs and vegetables, things they might actually eat. It felt absurdly hopeful, this act of planting, this investment in a future where they'd be able to harvest and consume what they'd grown. What if they don't grow? Mila asked, carefully pressing seeds into soil. Then we try again, but they probably will grow. Plants are resilient. Like us? Exactly like us. The school continued through the spring. Children who'd started barely able to read were now consuming books voraciously. Math skills were developing. They'd started history lessons, trying to provide context for what had happened without traumatizing children further. It was delicate work, balancing truth with age appropriateness, helping children understand without overwhelming them. Elena also started a small trauma support group for parents. Nothing formal, just a time for caregivers to gather and talk about the challenges of raising children in the aftermath of war. They shared strategies for managing nightmares, for responding to difficult questions, for maintaining patience when their own resources were depleted. The group was small but committed. Sonia was there, and Victor's aunt who was helping raise him, and several others. They met weekly, and the conversations ranged from practical to philosophical, from immediate concerns to broader questions about healing and recovery. One evening, a mother named Christina spoke about her daughter's selective mutism. She hasn't spoken since her father died in the shelling. She was 5 then. She's 8 now. Doctors say there's nothing physically wrong. She just won't speak. Does she communicate other ways? Elena asked. Drawings. She draws what she wants to say, and she can write a little, but her voice, it's just gone. The group sat with this, honoring the weight of it. Then Anna said gently, maybe she'll speak when she's ready, when she feels safe enough. Your job is just to keep creating safety, to show her that words can exist without danger. And if she never speaks again, then you love her anyway. You adapt. You find other ways to connect. She's still here, still alive. Everything else is negotiable. It wasn't comfort exactly, but it was perspective. The losses were real and ongoing, but so was the persistence of love, the commitment to continue regardless of damage. May brought genuinely warm weather. The school year was coming to an end. They'd decided to follow a rough traditional calendar, giving children summer break. Elena prepared a simple graduation ceremony for the students, marking their progress, celebrating what they'd accomplished. The ceremony was held outdoors in a small park that had been cleared of debris. Families gathered, children dressed in whatever nice clothes they had, pride visible in every face. Elena gave a short speech about resilience and learning, about how education was always an act of hope, always a declaration that the future mattered. Then each child received a certificate, handwritten on precious paper, acknowledging their completion of the school year. They weren't official documents, had no legal weight, but they were recognition, validation of effort and progress. Mila received hers with a smile that lit her entire face. She'd worked hard, had grown so much in just a few months. Elena felt fierce pride watching her daughter accept the certificate, seeing her stand tall among her peers. After the ceremony, families shared food. It was a potluck, everyone bringing what they could. The spread was modest but felt abundant. Bread and cheese, vegetables from early gardens, even some meat that someone had managed to acquire. They ate together, laughing, celebrating, creating a moment of collective joy. Dr. Kovacevic appeared, having closed the clinic for the afternoon. He found Elena in the crowd. I wanted to see this. The school you've built. We've built. It's collective effort. Still, it's remarkable. You've created structure out of chaos, given these children a foundation. What about you? How's the clinic? Busy as ever. But we got a new shipment of supplies and 2 more volunteers who have some medical training. We're expanding, able to serve more people. He smiled tiredly. It feels like we might actually be able to sustain this. Not just emergency measures, but actual ongoing care. They watch the children play, running and shouting with the unself-conscious energy of youth. They're healing, Dr. Kovacevic said, maybe faster than we are. Or maybe they're just better at showing it. I think the adults are healing too, just slower, quieter. I hope you're right. Summer arrived with real warmth. The city continued its slow recovery. More buildings were repaired, more services restored. The power came on with increasing reliability. The water ran consistently, Small businesses began opening, a cafe, a small grocery, even a bookstore that sold salvaged volumes from destroyed libraries. Elena reduced her teaching hours over the summer but continued coordinating educational efforts across the district. She helped recruit and train new volunteer teachers, organized resource sharing, worked with the Central Committee to develop some basic curriculum guidelines. The work was satisfying, building something larger than she could create alone. Mila spent her days playing with friends, helping in the small garden Elena had started in their building's courtyard, reading under trees in the park. She was tanned and healthy looking, the gauntness of winter replaced by the filling out that came with better nutrition and security. She laughed more, easily and often. The nightmares had decreased, though they hadn't disappeared entirely. One evening as they sat together watching sunset paint the sky orange and gold, Mila asked, "Mama, do you think about Papa?" Elena's ex-husband. She hadn't thought about him in months. Sometimes, why? "I'm trying to remember what he looked like, but I can't really." "Is that bad?" "No, love. You were very young when he left. It's natural that the memory fades. Do you think he knows about the war, about what happened to us?" "I don't know. Maybe. He's very far away, in a different country. The war might not have reached the news there, or he might have seen, but not known we were affected. Would he care? If he knew?" It was a harder question. Elena chose honesty. "I think he would care that you were in danger. Whatever problems he and I had, he did love you in his way. But I can't speak for him or predict what he would have done. I'm glad he wasn't here. Is that bad?" "No, it's honest. Our life is simpler without him. We take care of each other and that's enough. It's more than enough. We're good together, Mama." Elena pulled her daughter close, feeling grateful for this child who'd grown up too fast, but had somehow maintained core goodness, who asked hard questions and accepted complicated answers, who'd survived and was finding ways to thrive. The first anniversary of peace passed quietly in August, 1 year since the shooting stopped. The city marked it with a memorial service for those who died, a moment of silence, then a declaration of commitment to ensuring the war remained in the past. Elena attended with Mila and their extended chosen family, Anna, Sonia, and Victor, Petra and her family, Dr. Kovacevic. They stood together as names were read, as candles were lit, as people wept for those who hadn't survived to see this day. The service was painful but necessary. Collective mourning, collective memory, a promise to the dead that they wouldn't be forgotten, that their loss mattered, that the peace would be maintained in their honor. After the service, people lingered, reluctant to return to ordinary activity. They shared stories, remembered the lost, talked about how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. Peter Markovich gave a speech. 1 year ago, we didn't know if we'd survive. Today, we're not just surviving but rebuilding. We have challenges still, damaged infrastructure, economic devastation, ongoing trauma. But we've proven we can work together, can support each other, can create something worth preserving. That knowledge is foundation. Everything else we can build on that. As the crowd dispersed, Elena realized she felt different than she had a year ago. Less fragile, less constantly braced for disaster. Not healed. Healing would take years, maybe decades, maybe forever. But functional, engaged, oriented toward future, rather than just getting through each day. "Ready to go home?" she asked Mila. "Yes, can we stop by the bookstore? I want to see if they have anything new." That simple question. Could they stop at a shop for books, for pleasure, for no survival-related reason, encapsulated how much had changed? They had space for wants now, not just needs, for interests beyond staying alive, for the ordinary concerns of people building lives rather than just enduring. They stopped at the bookstore. Mila found a novel that interested her, and Elena traded some canned goods she'd been hoarding for it. The transaction felt joyfully normal. This exchange of resources for something intangible, for entertainment and enrichment. Walking home in the long summer evening, book clutched in her hands, Mila said, "This is a good day?" "It is. Do you think we'll have more good days?" "I think we'll have lots of them. Mixed with hard days, certainly. But yes, I think good days are going to become more common than bad ones. That would be nice. It would be. It will be. Autumn arrived with its familiar chill, reminder that another winter was approaching. But this time, people were prepared. Fuel had been stockpiled. Food supplies were adequate. Repairs had been made to ensure buildings could be heated safely. The first winter of peace had taught harsh lessons about what was needed. The second winter would benefit from that learning. School resumed in September. The enrollment had doubled from the previous year, requiring Elena to recruit more teachers and find additional spaces. They use 5 different apartments now on a rotating basis, with nearly 30 children divided into age-appropriate groups. The children who'd been with them from the beginning showed remarkable progress. Mila was reading at a level beyond her age, and her math skills were strong. Victor was developing an interest in science, asking questions about how things worked that delighted and challenged his teachers. The new students required more basic work, filling in gaps, building foundations. But they learned quickly, hungry for knowledge and structure. Elena also continued her medical training with Dr. Kovacevic. She'd become genuinely skilled at basic care, could handle many minor emergencies independently. The clinic had expanded into a larger space, and she worked there 2 days a week, seeing patients and learning from more experienced practitioners. The work was exhausting but meaningful. Each day brought visible impact. Children learning, patients healing, systems strengthening. Elena went to bed tired but satisfied, woke up with purpose. The despair and hopelessness of the war years was receding, replaced by engagement with concrete, solvable problems. One October evening, she received an unexpected visitor. The knock on the door revealed a well-dressed man in his 40s carrying a briefcase. Elena Petrovich? Yes? I'm with the Ministry of Education. I've heard about your work here, the school you've organized. May I come in? Elena felt a flutter of anxiety. Official government involvement could mean support or interference, but she invited him in. They sat at her small table, Mila watching cautiously from the doorway. I'll be direct, the man said. The government is trying to rebuild the formal education system, but we're overwhelmed. What you've done here, creating functional schools with minimal resources, recruiting and training volunteers, achieving actual educational outcomes. That's exactly the model we need. I'm here to ask if you'd consider taking on a larger role, district education coordinator officially, with resources and authority to replicate your success more widely. Elena was stunned. I'm not qualified for an official position. I just did what seemed necessary. That's what makes you qualified. You understand practical reality rather than bureaucratic ideals. You've proven you can work with limited resources, can organize effectively, can earn trust. Those skills matter more than formal credentials. I'd need to think about it. Talk to the people I work with. Consider what it would mean for our current efforts. Of course. But please, think seriously. We need people like you. People who stayed, who did the hard work, who understand what communities actually need. The rebuilding can't be directed by officials who fled and are now returning. It needs to be led by those who remained. After he left, Elena sat with the offer. The idea was intimidating. Official responsibility, broader scope, the pressure of formal authority. But it was also opportunity. With government backing, she could help expand education across the entire district, could ensure children throughout the area had access to learning, could make the improvised, fragile systems they'd built more sustainable and robust. She discussed it with her small circle, Anna, Sonia, Petra, Dr. Kovacevic. They all encouraged her to accept. You've earned this, Anna said, and you'll do it well because you understand what actually matters. Don't let fear of authority stop you from taking authority that could help people. Elena accepted the position. By early November, she was working part-time for the ministry, helping coordinate education efforts across the district. She hired Petra to take over day-to-day operations of their local school, trusting her to maintain the standards and approach they'd developed together. The work was different, more administrative, more meetings, more coordination with other officials. But it was also impactful. She helped establish 37 new informal schools across the district, trained over 100 volunteer teachers, organized distribution of materials and resources. The education system that emerged was unlike the centralized, rigid structure of before. It was distributed, flexible, community-based. Maybe that made it stronger. Winter arrived again, the second winter of peace. It was hard but manageable. People had learned what they needed, had prepared better. The shared suffering of the first winter had created networks that persisted, mutual aid systems that ensured no one was left completely without resources. Elena and Mila celebrated a quiet holiday season. They had a small tree, a scrubby pine that Mila had found in the park and insisted on bringing home. They decorated it with handmade ornaments, with strings of dried berries, with candles that they lit on special evenings. It was modest but beautiful, a declaration that joy was possible, that celebration had place even in difficult times. On the longest night, they invited their closest friends to share a meal. Anna brought soup, Sonia contributed bread, Dr. Kovacevic surprised them with a bottle of wine he'd been saving. They ate together by candlelight, told stories, sang songs from their childhoods. The gathering was warm and loving, a chosen family bound not by blood, but by shared survival. Afterward, when everyone had left and Mila was asleep, Elena sat by the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. 2 years since that first snowfall when she'd known the war was over. 2 years of rebuilding, healing, learning to live again. They weren't healed. The wounds were too deep for that, the damage too extensive, but they were healing, slowly and imperfectly, with setbacks and struggles, but also genuine progress. The city was still scarred, still struggling, but it was alive, functioning, forward-looking. Elena thought about resilience, about what it actually meant, not bouncing back unscathed. That was impossible. But incorporating damage into who you became, learning to function despite wounds, finding ways to create meaning and beauty, even from within broken contexts. She thought about Mila, asleep in the next room, this child who'd known war for half her life, but was finding ways to be joyful anyway. About the other children, learning and playing and growing despite everything. About the adults, going to work each day, maintaining families, creating community, choosing to continue. The snow fell softly, covering the street in white. In the morning it would be trampled and dirtied, the beauty temporary. But for now, in this moment, it was pristine and peaceful. And Elena allowed herself to simply sit with that peace, to accept it as real even if it was fragile. The first winter of peace had been about survival, about figuring out how to stay alive when systems were broken and resources were scarce. But this winter, this second winter, was different. It was about living, not just surviving, about building and creating and connecting, about slowly, tentatively, carefully constructing lives that could include pleasure alongside pain, hope alongside grief, future alongside memory. Elena stood and checked the stove one final time, ensured the fire would last until morning. She checked on Mila, adjusted her blankets, allowed herself a moment of pure gratitude that her daughter was safe and sleeping peacefully. Then she prepared for bed herself, climbed under her own layers of blankets, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, more work to do, more problems to solve, more healing that needed time and attention. But tonight, in this moment, they were safe. They were warm. They were together. And outside, the snow continued to fall, gentle and persistent, covering the world in quiet white, declaring in its own wordless way that peace, fragile, imperfect peace, would hold through one more night, one more winter, one more season of the slow, patient work of learning to live again.